Hello. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is well. I'm Avril Hepner from BDA Scotland. And as I say, I hope you're all well. We're looking forward to our BSL Blether today because we're talking about young deaf people and mental health. Mental health and well-being. So the positive side of things too. Now, you may all feel that we are seeing more and more deaf young people facing issues of mental health. That seems to be something we're all noticing. And here at the BDA, we think it's very important to discuss this really significant topic. We know that unfortunately we've lost some of our community to suicide, and self-harm is a very sensitive issue. So we have with us today two young people from Scotland who are prepared to talk about this discussion. They're both heavily involved with youth services. They're both involved with our Deaf Roots and Pride project, which we abbreviate to DRP, and they've both very kindly volunteered to join us this evening. We're also joined by a member of BDA staff, and we're looking forward to your questions, your comments. Please post them in the chat box. And remember that this is a sensitive subject. So we do need to talk about this. We can't ignore it. It's not something that we can just turn away from. We do have to face it. Young people are the future of our community. We need them. Without them, as older deaf people, what will we be passing on? So we need to look at this issue. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Kristers Lukins. Hello, Kristers.
Hello, Avril.
Hi, could you just tell us your name and where you're from, Kristers?
Well, my name's Kristers. This is my sign name, and I'm a member of the YAG, and that's part of the DRP, the Deaf Roots and Pride, and that's based in BDA, Scotland. And I'm
Great.
from Scotland.
I've got some questions for you later, so just bear with us for a moment, Kristers, while we introduce Erin McCluskey. Erin, hello.
Hi.
Could you tell us who you are and just introduce yourself, Erin?
Yeah, my name's Erin McCluskey. My sign name is this, and I'm also a member of the YAG, which is short for the Youth Advisory Group.
Lovely. How long have you both been involved in the Youth Advisory Group?
I've been there about 3-4 years.
And Kristers, how about you?
Let me think.
One.
It seems like a long time. Time's flown in. I would say 2 years, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for coming along tonight. We really appreciate it. Before we carry on, I'd like to introduce one more member of our group, and that's Moira Ross. Hello, Moira. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi there. Yeah, my name's Moira Ross, and I'm the Deaf Roots and Pride Transition Officer based at the BDA in Scotland.
Wonderful. Thank you all for coming along tonight. I think this is a very important topic. I think it concerns a lot of people, and a lot of people are worried about the future of the deaf community and about our young people. Moira, I know you've been working on the Deaf Roots and Pride project. When you're out and about with Deaf Roots and Pride project, I know that you may have seen and come across young people with mental health issues. So I want tonight to look at solutions as well as discussing the problems. But I want to start with what mental health means. What do we mean when we say mental health? What are we talking about there?
I think mental health can mean so many things, and it could be related to feelings of feeling low or anxious. There's a whole list of things that it could mean, but it doesn't have to be just a negative thing only. There is positive mental health.
Great. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there is both negatives and positives. I think mental health is one of those things that goes ups and down, go up and down. And I think if you're feeling that you're supported by your family and your peer group, that can assist your mental health.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those contributions. I'd like to ask you both, though, and Moira as well, because you've been involved in the Deaf Roots and Pride project. You've been out and about meeting young people. You've visited schools. You've met young people face to face. Is mental health an issue that you see commonly amongst young deaf people?
Yeah, you're right, Avril. I've went to lots of schools and I've seen situations where there's been young people that have limited communication. So, for example, when we come to the school or we bring a deaf role model, their eyes light up and you can see that they're actually just absorbing all that sign that they've not had that experience with.
Yeah.
The other thing that we notice is that maybe at home they're not getting like signing at home, so they're so excited to see their friends just to communicate.
Well, can I ask you, Kristers and Erin, when we're talking about mental health, you know, you're the future of our community. Um, do you feel, from your life amongst young people, amongst your peers, what kind of mental health issues are young people facing? What are we talking about here?
Well, for me, I see two things: depression, withdrawn, becoming quiet and isolated, and the other one was uh, anxiety and panic and anxiety and this really emotional trauma. And so for me, it's depression, anxiety really linked to exams.
Is that the same for you, Kristers?
Yeah, I would agree that, yeah, anxiety with exams, but also social media, this new phenomenon that we've got of social media, can have a really negative effect in young people. You know, say something gets flooded, all over social media, or they're a victim of bullying or something like that.
Okay, yeah, that kind of thing. I just want to wind it back a little bit for a moment. You talked about depression. Why do you think people are getting depressed? What's going on there?
Again, Afro, there's lots of reasons. I think we have to remember that young people are teenagers, and they're having to cope with things that are unexpected. And maybe one of the ways of coping, a strategy for them is becoming withdrawn, and that can lead to depression.
It can lead to what? Sorry.
So
Oh,
it can lead to kind of grief and stress.
yeah.
So
Okay.
for exams, like I had exams before, you could really get quite down because you felt that the pressure was too much for you and you just wanted to quit, and that then compounded the anxiety.
So a mixture of things going on there. And Kristers, sorry, you want to say something else?
Yeah, I wanted to add about depression really. Teenagers, are going through puberty, and that has a huge
Your body's
impact, all
changing.
those hormones in your body. Yep, absolutely right. And that affects you. It affects your sleep, it affects your nutrition. It can affect so many things physically for you as well.
So, Kristers, you spoke before about social media, texting, Facebook, all of those kinds of things. TikTok, there's a new sign, isn't there? TikTok, is that
TikTok,
it?
yeah.
Instagram. Do you think those kinds of things are affecting young people's mental health? Do you feel that sort of exposure affects them?
I think there is a pressure within social media for you to post a lot of things, but really amazing things out of the ordinary, and showing everyone what a good life you've got, and it could be there's some sort of things of body shame as well.
This sense
So,
of comparison. Hmm.
maybe you've got spots and you feel really bad about it and you don't want to sort of post anything because someone's picked up in your spots. Maybe you don't think you're good enough for things. All of these things are all elements.
So everyone's looking for likes, really, and if you don't get enough likes, then that
Yeah.
might affect your confidence.
Yeah.
Um, Erin, have you got anything to add to that about social media?
Well, I mean, Kirsta said it as well. Social media is just the exposure is just incredible. I mean, you put one thing in it, it's like gossip just going round the world. So young people, and particularly young deaf people, in that we in that kind of close world, information passes around really quickly. I suppose in the olden days when you didn't have phones, deaf people can't pick up phones. It was, you know, it was met in persons, but now with social media, and I think everybody's, you know, commenting and taking photographs of what they've saw on social media,
Yeah, and copying,
and things like that.
comparing. Yeah, yeah.
So nothing disappears. So you think you've deleted something, but someone else has taken a photograph of it and spread it everywhere, and that's really difficult to stop. So I think a lot of deaf young people, are really quite anxious about that and uncomfortable with that. It causes them stress.
So how do we prevent that? What can we do that's preventative?
Well, if you look what Erin and Kristers are saying about online, I think that the idea is that maybe we have to actually think about what's actually happening, and maybe educate young deaf people and how they can actually solve things in a room together, how you can express how you're not happy and look at solutions, having a kind of dialogue rather than having
Rather
this,
than hiding behind that wall.
multimedia, debate.
You, Kristers.
Do you know what? Yeah, I could add to that. The other thing about social media is that some of it is fake news, and sometimes, if something's happened or something's put on, you can go into school feeling really anxious, and that makes it worse.
So certainly that's something I think that we think mental health is related to, this kind of social media
Yep.
sense of comparison of self with others, as you
Mhm.
say, I've got spots and you haven't, that kind of thing. So in terms of well-being, your family, what you look like, all of these kinds of things can be compared on social media, and that can really affect your mental health. Also, the amount of time that you're online, texting and being on Instagram and so on. But you talked about anxiety as well earlier on, and particularly in relation to exams. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Me?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Well, really, when I look at the SQA exams I had at that time, that was the most popular time for people being stressed, not just deaf young people, all young people. I think we had maybe a double and triple stress level because of the communication barriers. So we had additional um, uh, support. So we would go into a private room to translate, we'd be videoed and signed. So they made adjustments, but that didn't wasn't a magic wand to take away the stress. The stress was still there. I remember, like, the stress would be, for me, for an example, a class teacher who couldn't sign, and I had a difficulty understanding what was just taught. And that, actually having to ask a teacher who can't really communicate with you, that in itself, asking for it's stressful, never mind the outcome. So that's a really difficult situation, and that just makes the stress grow. And I think that's the same for all young deaf people.
Okay, can I pick up on that? Because I think, we're all aware of the issues of language deprivation around the deaf community. And what we mean by that is that, deaf people who go along to school should already have language before they get to school. But of course, many of us arrive at school without sign language and don't have access to sign language at school. So that can affect mental health, do you think? I mean,
Oh,
if you
yeah,
can't sign, if there are communication barriers, do you feel
yeah.
that's an issue?
Oh, definitely, definitely. There's You can certainly see the impact of language deprivation in young people. You could just see it. It's all over their body and their face. You could just see them. It's almost as if they've been silenced, and that they don't even know how to use their hands. No one's taught them how to do it. So it takes a while for them to sort of build up. If you imagine, it's
Pressure
like
cooking
making
effect.
a big cocktail, putting all this ingredients in, and finally, once you shake it, explodes, and that's what
Like a
happens.
volcano, isn't it? You've got all of this kind of magma coming to the surface in a great explosion. Erin, yeah, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I think a lot of people want what's really the best for us, but we have to admit that teenagers don't cope very well through puberty with their spots. They worry about failure and disappointing people if they don't pass their exams. It's a really difficult situation.
So, Moira, do you think what do you think about the situation of language deprivation in schools?
Well, I think what we have to think about is we have to sort of put a focus on the young people at home and making sure that they're actually getting sign language that's age appropriate. So, for example, what you don't want is a child at 10 communicating at the same level as another deaf child that you would expect to communicate at 4. I believe that from birth there should be introduction to sign language,
It should
and
be
that sign language should follow them all the way through their
so when
life.
a deaf child is born, it should be automatically provided. So, how about schools? I mean, we've talked about language deprivation, but also, you might be provided an interpreter or a communication support worker in school, and their skills might not be entirely up to scratch. And do you think that has an effect as well?
Oh yeah. Um, Now, Avril, I'll be honest with you, we don't seem to have sort of the professionals come in that we did in the past. We tend to be getting people that are level 2, and it seems to be the attitude that that's okay for us, but it's not. I see them coming in and they've only got level 2 sign language, and it's so basic. And the thing is, they don't understand a word we're saying. And I want to feel comfortable
So
about
you can't
expressing
understand that
myself,
they
and they keep getting it mixed up, and you have to go back and forwards, and that becomes frustrating. And then what happens is you end up just maybe it could be you're the one that gets the blame as being this unruly child, or young person, but it's not. It's that miscommunication with the interpreter, and so you give up.
So that poor communication again can lead to mental health issues because it's going to build up frustration. Erin,
I can remember about National 4,
can
National
you
5.
clarify? You're talking about exams there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, yeah, we have a National 4 and 5 system in Scotland. So you start off in National 4, then you go up to National 5, and then you go to higher. And then after that, you can do some A levels. So then you have various subjects in each of these levels, and the vocabulary is very, very complex. So if you've got someone that's coming in with level 2 in BSL and you're asking them to translate complex information and create potentially signs so that the vocabulary and information is getting processed and presented correctly so that the deaf person can take it in. Well, if that's not
Well, I'm sure
happening,
that would
that's
affect
going
the
to cause
mental health.
stress. So think about it, Avril. Someone bringing in somebody here at level 2, I should be concentrating on my subject, the vocabulary. I shouldn't be trying to work out what the person's saying to me and not understanding what they're signing.
So many extra
It's
layers.
not the content. I don't understand what they're saying.
So these are issues, aren't they, about language deprivation, but also about language access. So again, important to get a kind of recognition of sign language globally that would really help in terms
Definitely.
of mental health, prevention of mental health issues. Moira, you go out and about to schools. What do you think about kind of mental health and well-being that you see on your rounds?
Now, I'm a signer. I always have been, and I agree with Erin. It is absolutely imperative that any communication professional knows how to adapt to that individual. So they must be able to adapt their language to fit the age um, and the communication level of the young person. And that's only the beginning, and that's how rapport starts. And from that, then you can build up that trust, and they'll maybe express themselves, and then dialogue and questions and answers will happen.
And also, if you've got a language role model, that can encourage you to feel happy, to feel well, because you can express yourself.
Yeah, also, Avril, just to add,
Yeah.
hang on a sec. Oh, some young people are always begging you to come back again when I go up to the schools. It happens so frequently.
Yeah, and you're invited back because you're a role model, and it's lovely for them to be able to see someone communicating in sign language.
Well, I want to just echo what Moira is saying, is that, children are constantly learning, they're constantly picking up vocab, critically thinking, analysing what these things mean. And deaf young people, compared to hearing people who get that through listening and overhearing, how are they going to get that without having that other person with the same language skills? It's another barrier.
I'm sure we could talk all night about this, because language deprivation seems to be a very, very clear indicator of mental health issues. And we talked about social media, so let's move the discussion on a little bit now. I want to talk about what seems to be an epidemic of young people presenting with mental health issues. So what kind of support might there be? Where do young people turn? Is that counselling? Is that medication? What's out there for you? And in terms of counselling, are there counsellors who are deaf, who use sign language, that are available to you? Are there gender-specific counsellors that are available to you? What are your views about those kinds of provisions?
Well, what I see is there's sort of two things. I think it's important for deaf young people that the person is young.
So you want young counsellors?
Yeah,
Okay.
and the reason for that, because someone who's older can't relate to us young people and how we feel about TikTok, Instagram, and this exposure that we have. They can't relate to what it was like in their time because it just wasn't. And things are changing all the time. Technology is so fast. So I wouldn't feel an older person would be relevant to me. That's personal. But I think if it was a young person there, I feel as if they would understand. They would empathy. That's the word. Yeah, they would have that empathy. And because I've seen the effects of it, of poor mental health. The second thing is absolutely fluent in sign. That is just absolutely one of the biggest issues for young deaf community.
So you'd like to see more young counsellors trained, but who have had experience of the digital era and can kind of empathize. Is that the same for you, Kristers, or do you feel differently?
Yeah, I agree absolutely with having young people and sign language, but I would add in a third that this person, if they were a deaf counsellor with a deaf person, I would feel they would automatically be able to understand and adapt.
And the
But if
fluency
it
of
was a
language,
hearing, yeah, and if it was a hearing person, I would just want to make sure that they would be able to,
maybe a coder.
understand, yeah, just being that natural way of understanding BSL or culture and how things work.
Interesting, thank you. And can I ask you both? Um, you're saying, Erin, that you would like someone to be young. Does gender matter to you? Would it matter if it was a woman or a man, or is sign language more important? What's important to you?
For me, Avril, gender doesn't matter really. For me, what's important is that if the person is deaf and can be able to empathise, have BSL, and what was my
And sort of
oh,
have
that's right.
a
My third
view
thing is
to
just
what's
being
going on.
aware of society and be able to change.
Yeah.
Could I add in, maybe I think young people would be fantastic, but sometimes we're using older people because they've maybe get more life experience.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So maybe it's the fact that they've maybe been through that journey and, they've maybe been a professional counsellor for a long time. So I think it depends what you're looking for. You're looking for a good match.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but we've got a lot of questions and comments coming in from our audience tonight. So let me just pick the first comment there, which is from Sean, who says, staying at home because youth services have been cut, there's been a lack of youth services and the correct professionals, that has affected young deaf people. Do you agree with what Sean is saying there?
Oh yes, he's absolutely right, Avro. You know, I see a lot of young people that are down because, you know, there's no deaf weekends, there's no family weekends, there's no deaf club. That isolation, all of that has been reduced and affects us.
Kristers, same for you?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it just feels like our youth clubs and youth community, that the numbers are dwindling, and it's like there's maybe not a lot of people there, or there's maybe only one available, so
Yeah,
that's your only choice. So, you know, before we used to have these options and that was lovely, but now you're forced to just choose one.
that's interesting. Lack of choice. Yes, Erin.
I think like we have sort of deaf youth clubs, but what we don't tend to do is sort of like come together. We're tending to have still Zoom things, and that can affect us as well.
Okay, I just want to pick up about something called COVID, and we remember that for some time. Actually, we only came out of that, just over a year or so ago. So obviously, COVID was a terrible situation. Do you feel, as we've emerged from that pandemic, that things have been better or worse, or how has it affected the situation?
COVID affected young deaf people so much. We were forced to stay at home. We had to do all our learning face to face. You couldn't go outside. Uh, uh, deaf people, we like seeing each other face to face and in the flesh, and we had to do it 2D. It just didn't feel natural. Um, So what happened is you become, y- in a way, used to the online, and then when the time was to come and meet people face to face, people were feeling anxious because they didn't know how to communicate anymore. So there was almost a dependency on the Zoom and a habit forming, and it felt that you didn't want to meet people. And I've noticed that as well. So I wonder, COVID,
Definitely a safe
COVID,
place.
the COVID effect's still here.
What do you think, Erin?
Well, I think before COVID, there really was problems for deaf young people everywhere. That happened, but I think when COVID happened, it just doubled, tripled, quadrupled. And I think the panic was there. There was lots of anxiety. You know, you had to stay at home.
Frozen. Oh, you're there. Go on. Go ahead, Erin. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, you just had to stay at home. It was almost like a trauma. But also, is what Kristers was saying, you became so used to doing Zoom to Zoom that when you met face to face, you didn't even know how to communicate. It took a while for that adjustment to happen. And then when we were finally allowed out, it was almost like we had to retrain our behaviour
Social
and social
skills. Yeah.
skills.
So, like,
Yeah.
you had to learn them again.
Yeah, you felt awkward, and then you knew you would feel awkward, so you started putting things off. And I know that affected a lot of young deaf people.
Moira, what do you think from a DRP perspective of the situation after COVID, post COVID?
I think really for young people from maybe about 13, 14 onwards, who were used to traveling on their own and doing sort of independent things, to all of a sudden become stuck in a house. And I think they became absolutely dependent on that just for social contact, and it's became habitual.
Okay, we've got another question from Abby. So let's show that on the screen now. Abby says, isolation at social events. So is it if a deaf person or child is at a family party and most of the family are hearing and there are communication difficulties, the deaf child might or deaf person might feel left out in the conversation, not able to connect to any background noises, and that can be very frustrating. So we've all had that situation, haven't we, where, you know, you've been out in a family situation like that. Do you think those kinds of things can affect your mental health?
Definitely. And Avril, that is just a perfect example of language deprivation. You know, it doesn't matter when you're in a family, you might have siblings and your parents, you want to be part of that family. Simple things like to say, how is your day or how do you feel? If you're not able to communicate that, so you're not able to get that information out or be able to ask the
That's
question
going to
and
cause
get that
depression.
response,
Yeah.
it will make you depressed, you're right. So I would encourage all families to learn sign, you know, at home with the deaf family member and just chat with each other. It will help them long term.
Well, you know, there's a famous kind of scenario, isn't there, of, you know, the dinner um, where the deaf person is just kind of, you know, looking up from their plate every now and again and sticking a thumb up occasionally. But it's so, so frustrating, like the traditional Christmas dinner experience for deaf people, for example. Kristers.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Avro. There's a lots of deaf people are born into hearing families and they can feel isolated. However, if you think you've got a deaf family, everything's positive, there could be a negative there
Tell us
because
more.
a deaf family can be really open sometimes
So you're
about
very
what they're
exposed.
saying. Yeah, and you
Mhm.
can see things. So, as hearing people can sometimes whisper to each other, and the young people don't
Ignore
get
them
to see it. But if you're young, that can be problematic because children can be watching the adults signing,
and
you know,
picking up
and
everything.
picking up information.
Pros and cons then. Pros and cons. Great. Thank you. That's an interesting point. And I'm just looking at, oh, sorry, Moira, did you want to say something?
You just on both the points Erin and Kirsta has made. I think when young people um, are in a one-to-one situation, a one-to-two situation, like within a family, they can manage. They've learned to manage that. But when the numbers get bigger, when it's extended family at a big event, they're lost, and that's when the deprivation takes place.
Okay, thanks for that. Folks, I'm going to turn to another question, which is going to appear on our screen now from Sally Work, who's asking, do you think social media can affect young deaf people? Do you think in the older times, fewer young people had depression than they do today because young people are looking at social media too much? What do you think about that?
Well, I think social media is the number one uh,
Common
thing,
cause?
yeah, common to all young people that they have stress with. And I would agree, definitely would think that social media has this power to create problems, arguments, debates, as taking photographs of content you've put up,
Bullying.
yep, bullying, and it just can manifest to all different things. You know, if you think back to the olden days when we didn't have
Yeah,
social
everything
media,
was
you had
fine.
to wait your time if you wanted to bully someone, you know.
And
But
this is in the
this is all
21st
happening
century,
in
isn't it?
school time and in real time. It's happening just all the time and anywhere. You know, you go to the youth club and you say, "Come on, have a chat." And no, 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 I'm on my phone. I'm on a phone. You're
And you
doing
do
it
it
whilst
while
you're
you're
traveling.
traveling. Yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, you go to the youth club and you're wanting to stop all that sort of negative vibe, but when you see everybody's concentrating on
It's
their
very
phone,
powerful, isn't
it
it?
really is. It's a powerful tool.
Thank you. Well, we've got another comment in. Actually, I might go back to a question that I wanted to ask you. Um, uh, in the olden days, schools, well, I know neither of you are at school now, but did they have kind of, did you have tuition on mental health issues and how to cope with
In
mental
my
health
time, Avril, I
issues?
didn't.
No?
In my time, I'm at school. I think I've had, yes, some of it, but not loads. You know, not loads of these amazing workshops that you would expect.
What about support?
Oh, definitely I've had support. You know, if you've got any issues, your pastoral care teacher.
Sorry, so this is a pastoral care. What does that mean? That's somebody who comes in and you go to them if you have any problems. Is that the?
Absolutely, that's exactly. And you have a really good relationship with this person. So, you know, um, it may be that your pastoral care teacher maybe is not are fully aware of all the things that's happening out there, in social media. But you can always get someone in, so you're always getting support. So you can get that at school, and we would have a discussion in school so that you realise that everybody this has happened to other people, so you didn't feel it was
So you
only
think it's
you and you
better
were
in
being
school?
targeted,
Yeah.
and that sense of relief was wonderful. So that's how we do it at school.
Okay, so maybe schools could give you more opportunities to look at this issue of mental health that we see around us in society now. Erin, you're saying you didn't have that in your time at school.
Yeah, when I was at school, I was the same as Kristers. I had a pastoral care teacher, and that was absolutely wonderful.
Okay.
You could discuss anything, but sometimes young people keep everything to themselves, and I don't think that's a good thing. They need to get it out. Um, but a lot of young people feel that it's better, no, just say nothing. But it's a difficult one.
Moira, can I turn to you then? In terms of the Deaf Roots and Pride project, are there opportunities for deaf people to express themselves there? If there are things they can't turn to their pastoral care tutor with or their main teacher, can they come to DRP?
Well, I think what Kirsten has mentioned is a fantastic idea. You get a topic and then you have a discussion,
Group
looking for
discussion. Yeah.
solutions, sharing information, advising each other, and also people all on the same level. That peer-to-peer support is really, really essential.
Yeah.
That's what I believe would be really, really helpful.
So workshops, looking at mental health issues, looking at
Yes.
social media, perhaps. Yeah. Okay, we've got more questions coming in. Let's take the next one. Okay, this is a question from Anne March. If we can show that question. I would be interested in learning about accessibility to counselling services. What barriers have you encountered? What do hearing counsellors need to know? So, what barriers are there in terms of kind of accessing hearing counsellors for you folks? Anything that we could feed back to Anne here?
Yep, I think for me, when young people have maybe had a lack of education, it's because the maybe that the education system has failed them, and the other thing is that maybe their English might not be as good as what would be expected for someone their age, but that's a second language. So I would be expecting counsellors not to go for their second language is pen and paper, but to actually get someone in who is BSL.
And you've got a right to that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, if you've got someone who does BSL, then you've got that connection right away. You're not waiting for a translation process. And again, that is another reason for
Frustrating.
mental health is this delay in getting your information across and the delay in getting it back to you. Do you know what I mean?
And perhaps
Yeah.
going round in circles, it's this kind of going round and round again, isn't it? And you get stuck in this sort of conveyor belt
Yep.
where you're actually not being served, you're just going round the system. So, what we've talked about as you've got older, do you feel that these issues have gone away, Moira? Or
I think what we're looking for is a couple of things. We need to encourage lots of young deaf people to get trained as counsellors. We need lots of young volunteers. And we need that group because we need to offer a selection. We can't have one person to do everyone. It's not good. We need to allow these young people to see that they have the choice, and maybe there's people out there that they feel that they could work with better. That's what I'd love to see.
okay, thank you. Erin wants to come back to you.
Moira, you've raised an amazing point. One of the many barriers, particularly at college and university, is you want good grades. Of course, you want good grades. And deaf young people at school sometimes feel that their grades are maybe just not bad. But at university, it's a case of those grades are not good enough. So we have to, learn, if we have to learn to become a qualified counsellor, it's all based on English language. So
Yeah.
that's a barrier for us as well. I think it would be a fantastic idea to encourage deaf young people to be counsellors or volunteers. I'm not thinking about a company sort of setting up, but I think this would be good that they
Well,
could,
got
or
more.
maybe a company set it up and then they could get involved in it and apply.
So you're talking about a company that kind of helps you apply and encourages people into that pipeline.
Yeah, I think that would be really good. I think that would be really good. It would raise the profile and actually start that dialogue. I think that would be good.
So that's one of the solutions, perhaps, then to bring in more deaf counsellors,
Yep.
so that you could go to someone that you felt comfortable with. Okay, great. I'm going to move on now. We've talked about a number of issues: language, we've talked about school, we've talked about various things. Now I'd like to kind of address the issue of, well, we talked about deaf counsellors and the solution of bringing in deaf counsellors in the future. But if I can bring us back to today, where we don't really have that provision. In the mainstream world, hearing people get access to counsellors, to mental health services, I mean, those kind of things seem plentiful in the hearing world. So what would you like to see more of? So maybe more BSL videos about mental health issues, or what kind of provision would you like to see to help you access some of the resources that are around in the hearing world?
Yeah, I would like access to information how you can cope in situations, to have coping strategies. I'd love to be able to develop a skill in that. I'd love more deaf people to understand that. I'd love to learn breathing techniques as well, and I'm sure other people, more
Tip,
counsellors, yeah.
yeah, okay.
And okay, now what I would like to see is more counsellors, but I know their stretch is really difficult, and that's in hearing people as well. So I know um, it's going to be difficult. So I think maybe if we create some sort of app
Yeah,
that gives
absolutely.
tips, on how to breathe and sort of calm and things like that in
Is
BSL,
seeing things.
maybe talk about depression, and talk about the importance of a routine when you have depression. So you see that being talked about. So there could be lots of these things that tell you things about like waking up at 7 o'clock in the morning, brush your teeth, and that
Oh,
seems to be
yes, I
very
do that.
popular.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. So it's making the sort of young person more accountable for themselves as well,
You
and
feel that would be
also
helpful? Okay.
definitely, Avril, because you feel you've achieved something. And
Yes,
again,
we
it's about
discussed them.
this positive mental health attitude as well.
That's interesting. Kristers, what would you like to see more of?
I think I would like to see more things like in Scotland, perhaps maybe have something from all of the regions, that can actually talk to each other. We don't know what's happening up north. Is there events up north? Is things happening?
Okay, so you'd like to
We need more events there. We need more role models. We need
in
places that are
rural
Aberdeen that are
areas.
more rural. We need that
Yeah.
connection with them because those young people are really isolated and they're really lonely. Some of them are frightened to travel. There's some of them just because of budget, they can't travel.
So when you're looking at isolation in the rural areas, of course, we've got some services in the more populated areas, but perhaps more services and outreach to those isolated people in rural areas. Thanks for that, Kristers. Okay, I'd like to talk now about, um, well, you mentioned this earlier, actually, sleep, nutrition, those kinds of well-being aspects that might be related to mental health. Can you talk to us more about that, Kristers?
Yeah, Avril, what it is teenagers love to eat rubbish food. They'll eat fast food, McDonald's, Indian food. It's all takeaway, Chinese, whatever. rather than homemade food. So a lot of things in it. Now they're going through puberty at that time, and really during puberty they should be having healthy food.
And do you think that affects your mental health?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So what happens is you start eating all this, junk food, it becomes habitual. That then itself makes you feel sluggish. You
And
feel
then
horrible about your body image. You know, teenagers love to be up to 2, 3 in the morning. 12 o'clock's an early bed. But you have to really train yourself and try and get to sleep properly because that does affect you as well. That wayward sleeping pattern can
and
affect
twist
your
and
mental
much
health.
mental health. Yeah, okay. Anybody want to add to that? Moira, Erin?
You've just made me think about something when I was at school, Kristers. You really get a good point. Most of the young people were staying up late, and do you know why? Because they had a youth club after school or a deaf club after school that they would have to attend. So what would happen would be they would be on their phone and FaceTiming people
Absolutely.
after the
Yeah.
youth club, just continuing with that chat, and that was going on to 2 or 3 in the morning. And remember, that was what was happening.
That's interesting. Moira, anything you'd like to say about sleep?
Well, I can't really add in anything that Kirsten is saying. You're absolutely right. I mean, young people are going to school and they're getting all of this education every day, and then they're going home and they're wanting to continue the conversation as well. So I think what we really need to do is we need to try and, as Kirsten says, retrain the body to have between 7 and 9 hours sleep, knowing that
Feel
your
well.
mental health will be so positive and that you will feel great. So, storing yourself up and then having all your chat at your weekend or certain nights is much better. What Erin said, have a routine.
Okay, we've got a question now from Stuart Patterson. Can we have a look at Stuart's question? Do you think that mental health services need to improve and be more accessible for deaf young people? Some mainstream mental health services do not know how to work with interpreters. So we've talked about this kind of interpreters and access, so what happens if you want to kind of resolve this? Do we train more interpreters? Do we train interpreters better? What do we need?
That's such a hot topic because for me, a deaf counsellor already has that deaf roots and pride, that essence of being deaf, that understanding, that empathy. So it's just easy right away. So contrary to that, not to have that causes stress. Um, it could be that maybe as a deaf person you want to maybe go to an event and you want to know about this thing, but it's all in English and you can't get an interpreter or the interpreter's not skilled enough. But they keep saying, oh no, but you have to learn English. And you think about my language is just as important.
So do you think that mental health services that are provided by hearing people, such as in hospitals and so on, do you think they need to listen to deaf young people so that they can adapt their services to be suitable? Because they're providing services to hearing people, but they're perhaps not aware that deaf young people have different needs and different situations. So do you think you could provide tips to mental health services? I mean, for example, here in Scotland, you know, there's no specific residential unit for deaf people with mental health issues. There's one in England, but that I'm sure there are hospitals giving treatment to deaf people with mental health issues, but they're more familiar, more used to giving that treatment to hearing people. So do you think deaf young people should have perhaps their own ward where everyone can sign with each other, or what solutions do we have for that?
Do you know, I would love that, Avro, but sometimes we have to think about young deaf people might not want that as well. But I think what's important again about all this is choice.
Yes, choice.
You know,
Okay.
hearing people can say, "Oh, I don't like in there with that people," or feel anxious and express themselves. Deaf people are not able to do that. So I think it has to be choice
Mhm.
again. And I think we have to be fair. If you're given what you're given to hearing people, all deaf people are looking for is the same and no more. The other thing is that, we have VRS now,
Yeah,
but
indeed.
young people, the culture for them is they can't be bothered with the phone anymore. They don't like it, makes them nervous. The social skills are not there to sort of have not been are not there and not being adapted, rather not being trained and encouraged. So, there could be more access to other things. So they would say things like, you can contact us by text, but you're asking us to do that in our second language, and that in itself is anxious. Or they'll say you have to make a phone call, which you can't do.
Okay, so can I ask you then, as young people, um, do you think other young people, when they're concerned about their mental health, do you think they turn to medication, or what do they do?
Who's first? Where we going?
Go ahead.
Okay. I'll go first, Kristers. I think, um, what tends to happen is if you go to your GP, the GP will tend to offer counselling as a first start, but medication, can be used, later on. It usually is tablets that are antidepressants,
Yeah, okay.
and sometimes you're usually not offered it under 16. It can happen, but they tend to not get to prescribe it to young people under 16. Uh, so it would more likely to be a counselling situation. I would think to and recommend a counsellor or a psychologist or psychiatrist, whoever was appropriate. And I think if they get it at time and get the appropriate communication method in there, i.e. BSL, then I think that would really, really work, rather than holding on to it till you're an adult and then maybe the only solution is medication.
What do you think, Moira? Do you see young people on medication, or?
Well, I think counselling is a good thing, but what I would be looking for is be making sure that the GP was absolutely understanding what the deaf person was actually saying, and then was able to make a decision based on
Yeah.
all of the information. Because what I see is people sometimes that the there's an issue that they could quickly resolve, with a peer support group or some treatment, and it depends. Every case and every individual is different.
Kristers, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to.
Well, also I think it's difficult for young people when they're going to a GP appointment. How do they book an interpreter? They don't even know how to. They're nervous about that. They've maybe never used an interpreter. They've always maybe used to their parents potentially. Maybe a deaf teenager doesn't want their parents to know, for
Yeah,
example, you
yeah.
know. So the
We need to
so
be educated in that.
absolutely, we need to be taught how to work with interpreters for post-school life.
Okay, we've got more comments coming in. One saying that there are plenty of NHS videos available in Scotland. Those are now being made available. Um, do you think that NHS Inform, NHS 24, do you think there should be more videos and information available for young people, Erin?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say the resources they have are fabulous. Um, and they usually, you're looking a bit for symptoms or something, you can go in there and you can find it.
Click.
But I
Yeah.
would tend to be the more representative of a more adult population. And sometimes
Okay.
they're talking about issues that affect young people as well. So I would like to see us be more represented.
So more young people in videos, more videos about young people, presented by young people as well, so that you can kind of empathize with that. You can relate to that.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. So more relatable videos for young people. Kristers, yeah.
Yeah, and Erin's right. The NHS have got some lovely videos, but I have yet to see anyone that's got someone that I would consider young. I think we need that, and we need them to give us more exposure.
and we need to be publicising that more. Maybe sending them out to what, youth clubs, or
Yep,
what? How do you do that?
schools, youth clubs, events, maybe if there was as an
Oh
event,
yeah.
something,
Okay. Okay.
contact
So,
pastoral care teachers, things like that. Maybe an event at the BDA.
maybe that's something the DRP could arrange, events that are showings of NHS videos that lead to discussion.
Oh, I like that idea. But also, I think it would be good to do maybe a bit of role play.
Yeah,
So I think
I
young
think yes,
people
I think,
like that,
yeah.
and we could actually demonstrate what it's good practice and how to work with an interpreter.
Erin?
Well, what I've tended to notice is when you go to the GP, they will give you a leaflet, particularly if you talk about anxiety,
Yeah,
and it's all
leaflets.
in English.
Mm.
I would love to see these leaflets translated into BSL and have that as a resource for us
You could just
so
get
that
them on your
young
phone or
people
something.
could access it. All we need is a bit in the back, a QR code or something there.
QR, yes, I was about to say that.
Yep,
Click the code and
QR
that's
code.
your phone.
That's
Yeah,
becoming so popular, and we could
BSL.
then see the
Just have an app.
translated version. We would feel so included.
And I just want to ask you, as young people, do you think, when you look around you at the world, do you feel that you trust the mental health provision that's there, or do you feel unsure about it? What's your view about it?
What an interesting question, Avril. Do I trust the current mental health services? I would say, yes, I do trust them, but they focus on hearing people. And I just want to say, hi, I'm here. What about us? Don't forget about us. We're suffering too.
Yeah, Kristers.
Yeah, I think for me, what I'd maybe be looking for is some kind of, like, say, for example, if I had anxiety, and or maybe overthinking something, or just was having some sort of dilemma or
Maybe a little bit
whatever.
paranoid about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I would love to be able to, talk to my friends and discuss these things, without any sort of negativity. And that comes with education too.
Plenty of food for thought there. Okay, so here's another question coming in. We've got so many comments and texts coming in, so I'm just looking through all of the texts. But let me ask, because we're slightly running out of time now. We've talked a lot about mental health, but if we talked about well-being, I mean, once we start, this is a huge topic, isn't it? But can I move us on a little bit before we close to well-being and to the kind of positive side of things? Any tips for young viewers who might be watching tonight about their well-being and how to look after themselves?
Sure. First thing is eat well, think about your food, sleep well. Maybe go for a walk outside, get the fresh air,
Yeah.
and maybe learn something new, a new hobby. That would be my tips.
Erin, yours?
I think for me, all deaf young people are putting too much pressure on themselves. I think you could all give yourself a break. You're at college or university and you're working 6 days of school a week with it and doing homework. So give yourself a day off. Treat yourself, do the things you love. Cook, bake, watch a film, lie in bed, watch the telly, take the dog for a walk. But please make time for yourself. That's important.
So a rest day. You're working all week. You have a
Absolutely.
day where you just switch off. Moira, any tips on well-being from you and your perspective?
Well, Kristers and Erin, I think I've just summed it up. But absolutely, go for your walk, take some photographs, because if you're at home and you're doing nothing, you've got nothing to then keep yourself going. Give yourself small little targets, and you will get it.
Something to stop yourself falling into a pit of despair, kind of thing. So it's keep going
Absolutely.
and keep changing things up. Good tips there, folks. Asking about, we've talked about tips for mental health and well-being, but if you had a crystal ball to look into the future to reduce issues of mental health. I mean, obviously, these kinds of things are never going to go away, but if you could look into the future through your crystal ball, what do you think the solutions are? What do you think will help us to reduce these issues?
Well, I think the problems just now is there's barriers for us all. There are barriers at communication, get into school, sometimes at school, at college and university. But young people now want to expose themselves to all of these different things. And what they don't want is the next generation to have the same barriers as us. So the removal of these barriers in universities and colleges and making sure that deaf people can get into these institutions, I think that'll really help with mental health.
So you've got something to pass on to the next generation. So more professionals coming into the field, more access.
Absolutely, and it's empowerment, Avril, too.
Empowerment. Okay. So Kristers, in your crystal ball, what can you see for the future? What solutions can you see for the future? What hope do we have?
I have so many hopes, and the hopes are all in form of so many deaf people coming in and getting involved in all different occupations and ways of life. Politicians, teachers, actresses, I want to see them everywhere. I want deaf people to understand that they can have that, but all they need is access and feel
And that will help
empowered to
mental
do that.
health.
Oh yeah, of course, because then they can fulfill their potential, and they have aspirations rather than this negativity of always feeling self-deprecating and saying that they can't.
They can't do it. They can't do it. Yeah, absolutely. And Moira, your tips for the future? Any solutions?
I think Erin and Kristers has covered it really.
Might have frozen a bit,
Um,
Moira. I think you have frozen a little bit. Oh, we got you back. There we are.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead again.
As I says, Kristers and Erin have really covered everything, but I would just add in social media is there for fun, but try and redress that balance and have maybe a wee bit more face to face interaction rather than having it all online.
Get out and about, chat in the real world, reduce the social media, more deaf role models, so that people can see a way forward to the future. Don't stay home alone. Don't dwell. Don't ruminate on your thoughts. And let's address this issue of language deprivation, so that you get your language back and your language access. And I think you, I have to say, are role models for the young people at home who may be watching, who are looking at the two of you here today. So I think it's really important that we're all behind you, we're all supporting you. We'd like to encourage more young people, and we'd like to encourage a better quality of life for all our young people. And so a final question for you is the Deaf Roots and Pride project that we have here at the BDA. Do you feel that has been supportive in terms of your mental health at all?
Definitely, definitely. The DRP at the BD is essential for young people. There's so much support there and advice, and it's so important. And I really hope that that continues. I don't want that momentum to close. We're really building things up, and deaf young people are getting access to all of this. I would hate to see that going back to the olden days where they were back to having big closed doors on them.
And that would really, has it built your confidence? Have you learned?
Yes. Yeah, I feel I've been a deaf role model now. I feel more confident in my signing and how I conduct myself. Yeah, I feel
Empowered?
empowered. Yeah.
Okay. Erin?
Well, I'll be honest with you, when I started the DRP, I wasn't that confident. I wasn't really good at giving feedback. That wasn't a skill that I really had at that time. But I have learned so much from there. My confidence has increased. My meta skills have just exploded, and I just feel like a different person. So I think that's because I've been involved in so many different projects that have just empowered me and enabled me. And I've also been with a group of deaf people working together, and we were getting our deaf young voice heard.
Oh, you're giving me goosebumps. Moira, how's that feel for you?
Oh, me too. Me too. I think it really is important that you know that you can do these things, that you have that potential. and also that you can know that you can be the future teacher in school. You have the potential and have the skills. You just need to go on that lovely journey.
Yeah, I think confidence is one of the keys to mental health, isn't it? And the ability to pass on your skills to generations coming up in the future. I'd really like to thank you for your time. I think we've talked covered a lot of issues today about mental health. And I hope that what we've discussed today will be useful for our viewers. So I'd just like to thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.